Hello. Before we begin, a quick note. The Boy to Sleep podcast relies on you and sponsors, which means you will hear a quick advertisement before the beginning of tonight's episode. While the podcast is free, you are welcome to subscribe for just $2.99 per month, which supports the creation of this podcast and gives you an ad-free listening experience. Simply click the link in the show notes from your podcast app. Rest easy.
This episode is brought to you by Prime. Obsession is in session, and this summer, Prime Originals have everything you want. Steamy romances, irresistible love stories, and the book-to-screen favorites you've already read twice. Off Campus, Elle, Every Year After, The Love Hypothesis, Sterling Point, and more. Slow burns, second chances, chemistry you can feel through the screen. Your next obsession is waiting. Watch only on Prime.
Sierra has all the best active and outdoor brands for the super athletic stuff, like running gear for cruising up the trail. Woo! And the super athletic-ish stuff, like fishing gear for chilling by the creek. Nice cast. Fitness apparel to push for higher reps. You got this. And golf balls priced so you can afford to lose one. Or a few. Head to Sierra or Sierra.com for the brands you want at the prices that let you do it all. From athletic to athletic-ish, Sierra's got it.
Hello. Welcome to the Bore You to Sleep podcast. The podcast that will hopefully help you get to sleep. I am going to read an open source book, one that is not particularly interesting, but one that is hopefully boring enough to get you to sleep. Tonight's reading comes from The Caravaners, written by Elizabeth Von Arnim and published in 1909. This story follows a German baron and his wife as they take a caravan holiday through England. My name is Teddy, and I aim to help people everywhere get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important, and my mission is to help you get the rest you need. The podcast is designed to play in the background while you slowly fall asleep. For those of you who are new to the podcast, you may not know that it started from my own struggles with sleep. I wanted to create a resource for others facing similar challenges, and I'm so grateful for the amazing community we've built together. The podcast is self-made and self-produced. That is why you'll hear a short ad at the beginning of each episode. These ads, along with support from subscribers and patrons on Patreon, enable me to keep delivering this podcast for free to those who need it. If you find the podcast beneficial and would like to support it, there are a few ways you can contribute. Follow the podcast in your podcast app and leave a comment. You can also become a subscriber by clicking on the link in the show notes for $2.99 per month, and it helps support episode creation. If subscribing is not possible, simply leaving a review and rating in your podcast app is extremely helpful. Even one sentence really helps out. If you would ever like to say hello to me, you can do that by visiting boytosleep.com. And if you know someone out there who also needs a good night's rest, feel free to recommend the podcast to them. In the meantime, lie back, relax, and enjoy the readings. Tonight's reading comes from The Caravaners by Elizabeth Von Arnim. Chapter 1. In June this year, there were a few fine days, and we supposed the summer had really come at last. The effect was to make us feel our flat, which is really a very nice, well-planned one, on the second floor at the corner, overlooking the cemetery, and not at all stuffy, but a dull place after all, and think with something like longing of the country. It was the year of the 5th anniversary of our wedding, and having decided to mark the occasion by a trip abroad in the proper holiday season of August, we could not afford. Neither did we desire to spend money on trips into the country in June. My wife, therefore, suggested that we should devote a few afternoons to a series of short excursions within a radius of, say, from 5 to 10 miles around our town, and visit one after the other those of our acquaintances who live near enough to Stottweiter and farm their own estates. In this way, said she, we shall get much fresh air at little cost. After a time, I agreed. The estates round Stottweiter are big, and we found on counting up that 5 calls would cover the entire circle of our country acquaintance. There might have been a 6th, but for reasons with which I entirely concurred, my dear wife did not choose to include it. Lines have to be drawn, and I do not think an altogether bad definition of a gentleman or a lady would be one who draws them. Indeed, Edelgard was in some doubt as to whether we should be even 5. A member of the 5, not in this case actually the landowner, but the brother of the widowed lady owning it, who lives with her and looks after her interests, being a person we neither of us can care much about, because he is not only unsound politically, with a decided leaning disgraceful in a man of his birth, and which he hardly takes any trouble to hide towards those views, the middle classes of a socialist sort of people call enlightened, but he is also either unable or unwilling. Edelgard and I could never make up our minds which, to keep his sister in order. It is only a question of beginning in time, as you mean to go on in fact, and of being especially firm whenever you feel internally least so. It is so easy that I never could understand the difficulty. It is so easy that when my wife at this point brought me my 11 o'clock bread and ham and butter, and interrupted me by looking over my shoulder, I smiled up at her, my thoughts still running on this theme, and taking the hand that put down the plate and said, "Is it not, dear wife?" "Is what not?" she asked. Rather stupidly, I thought, for she had read what I had written to the end. Then, without giving me time to reply, she said, "Are you not going to write the story of our experiences in England, after all, Otto?" "Certainly," said I, "to lend round among our relations next winter." "Certainly," said I. "Then had you not better begin?" "Dear wife," said I, "it is what I am doing." Then she said, "Do not waste time going off the rails." And sitting down in the window, she resumed her work of enlarging the armholes of my shirts. I wonder what she means by rails. I shall revise all this, of course, and no doubt will strike out portions. I wonder if she means I ought to begin with my name and address. It seems unnecessary, for I am naturally as well known to persons in Stottweiter as the postman. On the other hand, this is my first attempt, which explains why I wonder at all what Edelgard may or may not mean. Beginners doing well, I suppose, to be humble. At what poetic and literary and other persons of bad form call, I believe, wooing the muse. What an expression! And I wonder what muse. I would like to ask Edelgard whether she, but no. It would almost seem as if I were seeking her advice, which is a reversing of the proper relative positions of husband and wife. So at this point, instead of adopting a course so easily disastrous, I turned my head and said quietly, "Dear wife, Our English experiences did begin with our visits to the neighbours. If it had not been for those visits, we would probably not last summer have seen Frau von Arnim at all. And if we had not come within reach of her persuasive tongue, we would have gone on our silver wedding journey to Italy or Switzerland, as we had so often planned, and left that accursed island across the Channel alone. But we get there first, said Edelgard. I frowned a little. A few months ago, before that is our time on British soil, she would not have made such a retort. She never used to retort, and the harmony of our wedded life was consequently unclouded. I think she saw me frown, but she took no notice. Another novelty in her behaviour, so, after waiting a moment, I determined to continue the narrative. But before I go straight on with it, I should like to explain why we, an officer and his wife who naturally do not like spending money, should have contemplated so costly a holiday as a trip abroad. The fact is, for a long time past, we had made up our minds to do so in the 5th year of our marriage, and for the following reason. Before I married Edelgard, I had been a widower for 1 year, and before being a widower, I was married for no fewer than 19 years. This sounds as though I must be old, but I need not tell my readers who see me constantly that I am not. The best of all witnesses are the eyes also. I begin my marrying unusually young. My first wife was one of the Mecklenburg Lunwitzes, the elder and infinitely superior branch. If she had lived, I would last year have been celebrating our silver wedding on August 1st, and there would have been much feasting and merry-making arranged for us, and many acceptable gifts in silver from our relations, friends, and acquaintances. The regiment would have been obliged to recognize it, and perhaps our 2 servants would have clubbed together and expressed their devotion in a medal form. All this I feel I have missed, and through no fault of my own. I fail to see why I should be deprived of every benefit of such a celebration, for have I not, with an interruption of 12 months forced upon me, been actually married 25 years? And why? Because my poor Marie-Louise was unable to go on living, should I have to attain to the very high number of practically 25 years' matrimony, without the least notice being taken of it? I had been explaining this to Edelgard for a long time, and the nearer the date drew on which, in the natural order of things, I would have been reaping a silver harvest, and have been put in a position to gauge the esteem in which I was held, the more emphatic did I become. Edelgard seemed at first unable to understand. Indeed, once she grasped the point, she was even more strongly of opinion than I was that something ought to be done to mark the occasion, and quite saw that if Marie-Louise failed me, it was not my fault, and that I had at least done my part and gone on steadily being married ever since. From recognizing this to being indignant that our friends would probably take no notice of the anniversary was but, for her, a step, and many were the talks we had held together on the subject, and many the suggestions we both of us made for bringing our friends round to our point of view. We finally decided that, however much they might ignore it, we ourselves would do what was right, and accordingly we planned a silver honeymoon trip to the land proper to romance, Italy, beginning it on the 1st of August, which was the date of my marriage 25 years before with Mary Louise. I have gone into this matter at some length because I wish to explain clearly to those of our relations who will have this lent to them while we undertook a journey so, in the ordinary course of things, extravagant, and having, I hope, done this satisfactorily, will now proceed with the narrative. We borrowed the Colonel's wagonette. I wrote 5 letters announcing our visit and asking, a mere formality of course, if it would be agreeable. The answers arrived assuring us in every tone of well-bred enthusiasm that it would. I donned my parade uniform. Edelgard put on her new summer finery. We gave careful instructions to Clothilde, our cook, helping her to carry them out by locking everything up, and off we started in holiday spirits, driven by my orderly, Herman, and watched by the whole street. At each house we were received with becoming hospitality. They were all families of our own standing, members of that chivalrous, God-fearing and well-born band that upholds the best traditions of the fatherland, and gathers in spirit if not in body, like a protecting phalanx around our emperor's throne. First we had coffee and cakes and a variety of sandwiches. At one of the houses there were no sandwiches, only cakes, and we both discussed this unaccountable omission during the drive home. Then I was taken to view the pigs by our host, or the cows, or whatever happened to be his special pride. But in 4 cases out of 5 it was pigs. And while I was away, Edelgard sat on the lawn or the terrace or wherever the family usually sat. Then, after having thoroughly exhausted the pigs and been in my turn thoroughly exhausted by them, for naturally a Prussian officer on active service cannot be expected to take the same interest in these creatures so long as they are raw as a man does who devotes his life to them. We rejoined the ladies and strolled in the lighter talk suited to our listeners about the grounds, endeavouring with our handkerchiefs to drive away the mosquitoes, till summoned to supper, and after supper, which usually consisted of one excellent hot dish and a variety of cold ones, preceded by bouillon in cups and followed by some elegant sweet and beautiful fruit. After supper, I repeat, having sat a while smoking on the lawn or terrace, drinking coffer and liqueurs and secretly congratulating ourselves. The last of these visits was to Frau von Echtem and her brother, Graf Litz von Flitzberg, who, as is well known, being himself unmarried, lives with her and looks after the estate left by the deceased Echtem, thereby stepping into shoes so comfortable that they may be more properly spoken of as slippers. All had gone well up to that, nor was I conscious till much later that that had not gone too well. For only looking back do we see the distance we have come, and the way in which the road, at first so promising, led us before we knew where we were into a wilderness plentiful in stones. During our first 4 visits, we had naturally talked about our plan to take a trip in August in Italy. Our friends obviously surprised, and with the expression on their faces that has its source in thoughts of legacies, first enthusiastically applauded, and then pointed out that it would be hot. August, they said, would be an impossible month in Italy. Go where we would, we should not meet a single German. This had not struck us before, and after our first disappointment we willingly listened to their advice rather to choose Switzerland, with its excellent hotels and crowds of our countrymen. Several times in the course of these conversations did we try to explain the honeymoon nature of the journey, but were met with so much of what I strongly suspect to have been witful obtuseness, that to our chagrin we began to see there was probably nothing to be done. Edelgard said she wished it would occur to them if, owing to the unusual circumstances, they did not intend to give us actual ashtrays and matchboxes, to join together in defraying the cost of the wedding journey of such respectable silver honeymooners. But I do not think that at any time they had the least intention of doing anything at all for us. On the contrary, they made us quite uneasy by the sums they declared we would have to disburse, and on our last visit to Frau von Arnim, happening to bewail the amount of good German money that was going to be dragged out of us by the rascally Swiss, Frau von Arnim said, "Why not come to England?" At the moment, I was so much engaged mentally reprobating the way in which she was lying back in a low garden chair, with one foot crossed over the other, and both feet encased in such thin stockings, that they might just as well not have been stockings at all, that I did not immediately notice the otherwise striking expression, "Come, go," would of course have been the usual and expected form, but the substitution, I repeat, escaped me at the moment because of my attention being otherwise engaged. I never saw such little shoes. Has a woman a right to be conspicuous at the extremities? So conspicuous, Frau von Arnim's hands also easily become absorbing, that one is unable connectedly to follow the conversation. I doubt it, but she is an attractive lady. There sat Edelgard, straight and seemly, the perfect flower of a stricter type of virtuous German womanhood, her feet properly placed side by side on the grass and clothed, as I knew, in decent wool, with the flat-heeled boots of the Christian gentlewoman. I must say the type, in one's wife, that is preferable. I rather wondered whether Flitz noticed the contrast between the two ladies. I glanced at him, but his face was as usual a complete blank. I wondered whether he could or could not make his sister sit up if he had wished to, and for the 100th time I felt I never could really like the man, for from the point of view of a broker, one's sister should certainly sit up. She is, however, an attractive lady. Alas, that her stockings should be so persistently thin. England, I heard Edelgard saying, is not, I think, a suitable place. It was then that I consciously noticed that Frau von Arnim had said come. Why not, she asked, and her simple way of asking questions or answering them with others of her own, without waiting to adorn them or round them off with the title of the person addressed, has helped, I know, to make her unpopular in Stochwider society. I have heard, said Edelgard, cautiously, no doubt bearing in mind that to hosts whose sister had married an Englishman, and was still living with him, one would not say at all would like to know about it. I have heard that it is not a place to go if the object is scenery. Oh, said Frau von Arnim. Then she added intelligently, I thought, but there always is scenery. Edelgard means lofty scenery, said I gently, for we were both holding cups of the Ectum tea, and I have always held one ought to humour the persons whose hospitality one happens to be enjoying, or enduring, said Edelgard cleverly when, On our way home, I mentioned this to her. Or enduring, I agreed after a slight pause, forced on reflection to see that it is not true hospitality to oblige your visitors to go without their coffee by employing the unworthy and barbarically simple expedient of not allowing it to appear. But of course, that was Flitz. He behaves, I think, much too much as though the place belonged to him. Flitz, who knows England well, having spent several years there at our embassy, said it was the most delightful country in the world. The unpatriotic implication contained in this assertion caused Edelgard and myself to exchange glances, and no doubt she was thinking, as I was, that if it would be a sad and bad day for Prussia, if many of its gentlemen had sisters who made misguided marriages with foreigners, the foreign brother-in-law being so often the thin end of that wedge, which at its thick one is a denial of our right to regard ourselves as specially raised by Almighty God to occupy the first place among the nations, and a dislike I have heard, with my own ears, a man at a meeting express it, an actual dislike, I can only call it hideous, of the glorious cement of blood, and iron by means of which we intend to stick there. But I was chiefly thinking, said Frau von Arnim, her head well back in the cushions and her eyes fixed pensively on the summer clouds sailing over our heads, of what you were saying about expense. Dear lady, I said, I have been told by all who have done it that travelling in England is the most expensive holiday you can take. The hotels are ruinous as well as bad. The meals are uneatable as well as dear. The cabs cost you a fortune, and the inhabitants are rude. I spoke with heat because I was roused justly by Flitz's unpatriotic attitude, but it was a tempered heat owing to the undoubted, Stotchwider cannot deny it, personal attractiveness of our hostess. Why are not all women attractive? What habitual lambs our sex would become if they were. Dear Baron, said she in her pretty, gentle voice, do come over and see for yourself, if you like. I would like, I think, to convert you. Look at this. She picked up papers lying on the grass by her chair, and spreading out one showed me a picture. Do you not think it nice? And if you want to be economical, it only costs £14 for a whole month. The picture she held out to me was one bearing a strong resemblance to the gypsy carts that are continually, and very rightly, being sent somewhere else by our local police. A little less gaudy perhaps, a little squarer, and more solid, but undoubtedly a near relation. It is a caravan, said Frau von Arnim, in answer to the question contained in my eyebrows, and turning the sheet she showed me another picture representing the same vehicles inside. Edelgard got up and looked over my shoulder. What we saw was certainly very nice. Edelgard said so at once. There were flowered curtains and a shelf with books and a comfortable chair with a cushion near a big window, and at the end 2 pretty beds placed one above the other as in a ship. A thing like this, said Frau von Arnim, does away at once with hotels, waiters, and expense. It costs £14 for 2 persons for a whole month, and all your days are spent in the sun. She then explained her plan, which was to hire one of these vehicles for the month of August, and lead a completely free and bohemian existence during that time, wandering through the English lanes, which she described as flowery, and drawing up for the night in a scheduled spot near some little streamlet, to the music of whose gentle rippling, as Edelgard, always easily inclined to sentiment, suggested, she would probably be lulled to sleep. "Come to," said she, smiling up at us as we looked over her shoulder. 280 marks is 14 pounds, said I, making mental calculations. For 2 people, said Edelgard, obviously doing the same. No hotels, said our hostess. No hotels, echoed Edelgard. Only lovely green fields, said our hostess. And no waiters, said Edelgard. Yes, no horrid waiters, said our hostess. Waiters are so expensive, said Edelgard. You wouldn't see one, said our hostess. Only a nice child in a clean apron from a farm bringing eggs and cream. And you move about the whole time and see the country in a way you never would, going from place to place by train. But, said I shrewdly, if we move about, something must either pull or push us, and that something must also be paid for. Oh yes, there has to be a horse. But think of all the railway tickets you won't buy and all the porters you won't tip, said Froy von Ectum. Edelgard was manifestly impressed. Indeed, we both were. If it were a question of being in England for little money or being in Switzerland for much, we felt unanimously that it was better to be in England. And then to travel through it in one of these conveyances was so distinctly original that we would be objects of the liveliest interest during the succeeding winter gaieties in Stotzweiter. The von Ottringulls are certainly all that is most modern. We could already hear out our friends saying to each other, and could already see in our mind's eye how they would press round us at soirees and bombard us with questions. We should be the centre of attraction. And think of the nightingales, cried Edelgard, suddenly recollecting these poetic birds. In August, they're like Germans in Italy, said Flitz, to whom I had mentioned our reason for giving up the idea of travelling in that country. How so? Said Edelgard, turning to him with the slight instinctive stiffening of every really virtuous German lady, when speaking to an unrelated by-blood man. They're not there, said Flitz. Well, of course, the moment we were able to look in our encyclopedia at home, we knew as well as he did that they not sing in August. But I do not see how townsfolk are to keep these odds and ends of information lying loose about in their heads. We do not have the bird in Stottweiter, and are therefore unable to study its habits at first hand as Flitz can. But I know that all the pieces of poetry I have come across mention nightingales before they have done, and the consequent perfectly natural impression left on my mind was that they were always more or less about. But I do not like Flitz's tone, and never shall. It is true, I have not actually seen him do it, but one feels instinctively that he is laughing at one, and there are different ways of laughing, and not all of them appear on the face. As for politics, if I were not as an officer debarred from alluding to them, and were led to discuss them with him, I have no doubt that each discussion would end in a duel. That is, if he would fight. The appalling suspicion has just crossed my mind that he would not. He is one of those dreadful persons who cloak their cowardice behind the garb of philosophy. Well, well, I see I am growing angry with a man 10 miles away, whom I have not seen for months. I, a man of the world, sitting the calm of my own flat, surrounded by quiet domestic objects such as my wife, my shirt, and my little meal of bread and ham. Is this reasonable? Certainly not. let me change the subject. The long, then, and the short of our visit to Graf Flitz and his sister in June was we returned home determined to join Frau von Achtem's party, and not a little full of pleasurable anticipations. When she does talk, she has a persuasive tongue. She talked more at this time than she ever did afterward, but of course there were reasons for that which I may or may not disclose. Edelgard listened with something like rapt interest to her really picturesque descriptions, or rather prophecies, for she had not herself done it before, of the pleasures of camp life. And I wish it to be clearly understood that Edelgard, who has since taken the line of telling people it was I, was the one who swept her off usually cautious feet, and who took it upon herself without waiting for me to speak to ask Frau von Achtem to write and hire another of the carts for us. Frau von Achtem laughed and said she was sure we would like it. Flitz himself smoked in silence, and Edelgard developed a sudden eloquence in regard to natural phenomena such as moons and poppies, that would have done credit to a young and sentimental girl. "Think of sitting in the shade of some mighty beech tree," said she. For instance, she actually clasped her hands, with the beams of the sinking sun slanting through its branches and doing one's needlework. And she said other things of the same sort, things that made me, who knew she was going to be 30 next birthday, gaze upon her with deep surprise. And that concludes tonight's readings. If you're not quite tired yet, you're always welcome to listen to another episode of the Boy to Sleep podcast. Until next time, good night.